Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Today is my first YouTube live stream Q&A. So any questions that pop up here on the chat, I will feel free and answer them. So right now, first time doing this, so there may be some technical difficulties off the bat, but any users out there listening, feel free and chat away and I will start answering some questions. So off the bat, couple of little foundational pieces for anyone kind of joining in. Health really starts kind of at the bottom, foundational level, and that's always going to be with diet and lifestyle. So that's kind of like your low-hanging fruit. So I see lots of patients that come in that have thyroid issues, that have female hormone issues, that have digestive gut issues, and we got to get kind of more nuance with doing some lab testing and creating some specific protocols and working on supporting the body so it can start healing faster. Because eventually, diet and lifestyle, you'll kind of get tapped out on what you can do with that, how much you can heal with that. But that's always the starting point. So I always recommend patients off the bat really make sure the diet and lifestyle is 100% tweaked. So if you're listening for the first time, the first things I'm going to recommend is make sure your diet is nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory, and low toxin. That'd be the first thing I would suggest off the bat. So the real easy substitute to make is going to be sub your grains for greens. That's going to be the first thing. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to lower inflammation. It's going to increase nutrient density, but it's also going to lower toxicity because grains are one of the most highest GMO types of foods, and GMO is going to mean that it's going to be sprayed with various pesticides like glyphosate or Roundup. And it also means that it's genetically modified. So that means it's going to be resistant to Roundup. It also can produce other kinds of internal pesticides like Bt toxin, etc. So subbing the grains for greens is going to be one of the first steps that you can make. Now, any questions out there, feel free and post. And I would love to answer any questions that come on here live. So that'd be the first tip I would say. Number two, people that have slower metabolisms. One of the things that I learned from Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Body, great tip. 30 grams of protein in the first 30 minutes of waking up can really, really jumpstart your metabolism. So if your metabolism is slower, you're a little bit more sluggish, you have energy issues, you're trying to lose weight, you have fatigue issues, one of the first things you can do, 30 grams of protein in the first 30 minutes of waking up. Now, what I did this morning, pretty simple, I did like a butter coffee with MCT. Now, I did that because I really want to perpetuate and drive my body going into ketosis. And I actually have a ketone meter on my desk right back here. And I typically would test it after breakfast. Let me see if I can pull it out. Yeah, we're live. So my ketone meter right here, I use the Precision Extra by Abbott, and I typically get my ketones up to 0.5 to 1 millimoles within an hour or two after eating. So I'm in ketosis. I get that benefit, that neurological benefit of ketones going to my brain. I also then add in about 20 to 30 grams of collagen, True Collagen, my brand, that's hydrolyzed in peptide form, so it bypasses the gut and gets into the bloodstream easier. And also add a little bit of whey protein just to balance off some of the sulfur aminos. Whey protein does have a higher amount of sulfur aminos, such as cysteine, and it's very high in glycine. Collagen is also high in glycine. The whey protein really balances off the collagen because the whey has a lot more glutathione precursors. A lot of research on whey protein really increasing glutathione levels. Now with collagen, you get the hydroxyproline, proline, and glycine, which is great for the gut, and some glutathione stuff there. And then you balance it up with the whey, then you got a really good, complete, awesome protein. I got a podcast that'll be coming out in the next week on that topic. We go more into depth in the podcast, so take a look and be ready for that. So my breakfast, bulletproof coffee, high quality coffee there. Next was like the collagen and the whey protein. So I got about 35 grams of protein. I got about a tablespoon of MCT, about a tablespoon of butter, and then some high quality coffee. So I'm in the zone right now. And the next thing I did on top of that, high dose vitamin C. And then I also did some amino acids for the brain, adaptogenic herbs right here, and a little bit of mitochondrial nutrients. So that's kind of my stack in the morning. So I wake up, great focus, great brain energy, so I can be on point with my patients all day. So that's a good starting point. Next, what's next? I would say meal timing is probably a good next starting point. Again, there's a lot of information out there about intermittent fasting and about just fasting in general. I think there's some really good stuff regarding that The issue is, where do you stand, right? The healthier you are, the more you can make adjustments and necessarily go against the grain. I kind of talk about, you watch baseball players get in the batter's box and they do all these funky kind of things with their swing. Now, if you know anyone, they'll talk about fundamentals. That's not where you want to start. But once you're at that level, you can kind of do whatever you want and look as goofy as you want because it makes you feel good. That's fine. So when you're healthier, you can kind of try and tweak different things. Hey, I'm going to do cold water thermogenesis. I'm going to do intermittent fasting. I'm going to do all these different kinds of smart drugs. Great. But if you're not at that really good baseline of health first, that's probably not a good starting point. Especially my patients that have female hormone issues and or thyroid issues, there almost always is a blood sugar component that is connected with that. So in other words, the more your blood sugar ebbs and flows, the more your hormones kind of have to come in and buffer the high and the low of those swings. In other words, if you have a really sugary meal or a meal that's not fully balanced with the right macronutrients, blood sugar could go up really fast and then drop down. This is called reactive hypoglycemia. And this is common in a lot of people. They say, well, Dr. J, I eat every 3 or 4 hours and I'm doing a good job. We look at their macronutrients and it's 70 or 80% carbohydrate. And you can go look at the food pyramid, right? The food pyramid, I think, is 70% carbohydrate to begin with, 60 to 70%, especially if you're doing the 10 to 12 servings of grains that they recommend. Let's see. Do I have any questions here off the bat? Let me see here. Not quite sure how to read or see questions. Let me see here. Do I have any questions coming up? Okay. If any questions come up, feel free and let me know. So off the bat, blood sugar stability, right? We have the reactive hypoglycemia, like I mentioned. So what happens there is this. Blood sugar goes up. So your body spits out a whole bunch of, you make a whole bunch of sugar because you just took it in, right? So all that carbohydrate, if it's grains, even though there's not any added refined sugar to it, your body still breaks it down and it gets into the bloodstream. Now, the faster that sugar goes into the bloodstream, right, the faster the glycemic index or glycemic load, the higher the glycemic index or load is, the faster that sugar gets into the bloodstream. So it's like playing tug of war, right? If I'm on the rope and you're on the other end of the rope and I tug just a little bit, your natural response will be just tug a little bit back, right? That's kind of natural. Or if I kind of give you a little push, you're going to push me back a little bit. Now, if I really lay my body into it and really tug, your natural response is going to be to really lay your body into it and really tug. So what does that mean? The more your blood sugar spikes up, the faster it spikes up, your body, that's like me pulling, right? I'm pulling by entering all that sugar into my bloodstream, and my body is going to pull back. And how it pulls back with the pancreas by producing insulin from the beta cell. So the insulin will then take that blood sugar and go, it'll pull and drop that blood sugar. And again, the faster that blood sugar drops, an hour or so later, you're going to be irritable. You may be anxious. You may have some heart palpitations. You may feel like a little bit flighty or fatigued. I even have some people that have these hypoglycemic syncope episodes where they'll actually pass out and faint. I've seen that quite frequently. And a lot of that's going to have to do with the fact that their blood sugar handling systems, they aren't too well at them. They aren't at optimal function. And I see it with patients that do a lot of bulletproof coffee, which can be great. I do that as well, like the coffee butter and MCT. But if they have really weak hormonal systems, they may need to add some 20 or 30 grams, a couple tablespoons of collagen with that. They may want to have a nice soft-boiled egg with that as well, just to increase the proteins to help stabilize the blood sugar. All right, that can be helpful just so there's a little bit of blood sugar stability. Even if it's via gluconeogenesis, the body will take some of the amino acids and shuttle it into glucose, which will have a nice blood sugar stabilizing effect. So getting back to the push and pull, right? Blood sugar goes up, pancreas comes out, takes that sugar right down. And the faster that sugar goes up, the faster it goes down, right? The higher you go up on that roller coaster, the faster you go down. And that creates all the symptoms, right? The hypoglycemic, the fatigue. It also creates cravings. Now, here's the problem with that. The more cravings you have, the more it creates a vicious cycle, right? And the vicious cycle is nothing more than you have more cravings. So then what are you going to reach for 2, 3, 4 hours later? Well, for the most part, you're going to go reach for more carbohydrates, refined sugar. And let's say let's say you're trying to be paleo, right? Well, you may go reach for some mangoes. You may go reach for a lot of berries. You may go reach for some safer starches. And even though they may not have the inflammatory components, let's say of like pizza or grains, they're still going to create a stressor on your hormonal system and then set you up for this other reactive hypoglycemic roller coaster ride. And most people literally live their life on a roller coaster ride of blood sugar, and that creates more problems. So number one, you got to get your hormones right so you can essentially choose the right foods. So there's an expression by Yogananda. Let's see, how does the expression go? Environment is stronger than willpower. That's his quote. Environment is stronger than willpower. Now, my quote is, I've kind of changed it a little bit, is hormones are stronger than willpower. Now, what I mean is the more you are pushing your body to hypersecrete insulin and then hypersecrete cortisol to bring that blood sugar back up, and then hypersecrete glucagon, and then hypersecrete adrenaline, because cortisol doesn't just pick up that blood sugar by itself. It's going to use adrenaline or epinephrine and norepinephrine to help bring that blood sugar back up. Your body will also take dopamine and rob dopamine and pull it downstream to make adrenaline. So what does that mean? That means if you're in a chronic hypoglycemic pattern, you're going to rob from your dopamine. That's your I love you neurotransmitter. That's going to help you to feel good. It's also going to help you to feel focused. So you got lots of people that are going to be perpetually needing to be on ADHD medication like Prozac or Ritalin and such. Those are going to be medications that are going to really help with the focus and the attention. Adderall too, right? Now, your body is depleting those natural chemicals that would be there to help hold your attention, right? The dopamine precursors, the adrenaline precursors. So the more you can actually do something so simple by dialing in your macronutrients, having the right amount of protein, fat, and carbs at each meal, you automatically then take that pathway and you blunt it and you relax it. So now your body's not going to be burning up your neurochemicals like dopamine. It won't be burning up the adrenaline as much, and it will be much more stable. And one of the first things that you're going to notice when that happens is you're going to feel more relaxed throughout the day. You'll feel more relaxed. You won't have the palpitations. You won't have the anxiety. You'll be able to hold your attention and focus better. And also, the more dopamine you have, the more pleasure you're going to get out of life. When you do certain things, whether it's achieve a task or connect with a loved one, your little synapses spit out a little bit of dopamine. And you can imagine that if your dopamine levels are low, what's going to happen? You're going to have less dopamine spit out each time, then you're going to have less reward for doing those tasks that you may have had more reward from in the past. So if we can dial back in those levels, life actually becomes more fulfilling. It's pretty amazing. So where does that all start? It starts with high quality blood sugar supporting nutrients. So what do I recommend off the bat? Starting off, a palm to a fist to a full hand of protein is a great starting point. Ideally choosing high quality grass-fed, organic, low toxin, no antibiotic, organic types of meat. That's going to be our starting point. Typically, your hand size is going to be based on how big you are. I'm 6'2", 210, so my hand's a little bit bigger than, let's say, a 5'2", 100-pound female, right? So typically, a palm size is going to be anywhere between 2 to 4 ounces, and then a hand size will be anywhere between 4 to 8 ounces, depending if you're male or female. So that kind of gives you a good general range. And protein is going to be based off of what? How big you are, number one. Also, stress. Again, if you're a sedentary male versus a woman who's doing CrossFit, that CrossFit female may need a little bit more protein than you. So you kind of have to, one, gauge how big you are, but two, also gauge your demands. That's a good starting point. Next, I say, is carbohydrate. So the first step is look at how good you are from a shape standpoint, right? Be honest with yourself. Are you overweight? Are you at a good weight? What's your waist size? That's pretty objective. So I like, obviously 35 inches or less for a female, 40 for a male. If you're over that, that means there's some level of insulin resistance happening. So the more insulin resistant you are, what that means is you got to keep the carbohydrates down just a little bit, right? So I typically recommend, if you're insulin resistant, we got to keep the carbs down to about 30 to 50 grams a day of net carbohydrates. I would say 80 to 90% non-starchy veg like broccoli, kale, spinach, those kind of things. And then maybe 1 to 2 servings of low glycemic fruit like a handful of berries. And I recommend keeping the safe starch out for a bit. But then as you kind of find that groove and where you feel the best, then we can start to taper up and dial up the carbohydrates into a good range, maybe 50 to 100 grams. Again, as long as you feel good and as long as your weight's good. So that's a good starting place with the blood sugar. Any questions on functional medicine aspects with this, feel free and let me know in the chat. You can put a little chat message in the group chat, I think on the right sidebar of your screen, and I'll feel free and answer any questions. If there are no questions, I'm going to just keep on riffing like I do. All right, so next step. One of the first things that I see with a lot of patients that come into my clinic is going to be fatigue. Fatigue is obviously the big symptom, right? The first symptom. And then with fatigue, if you're a female, fatigue is almost always going to pull chronically from your female hormones. So what does that mean? It's going to pull from progesterone typically, because progesterone is a building block of cortisol. So the more fatigued you are and the more stressed you are, the more you start creating a pattern. You start creating a pattern of estrogen dominance, okay? So what that means is your relationship to progesterone and estrogen start becoming skewed. So let me just give you an example. Imagine this is progesterone and this is estrogen, for instance. We typically always should have more progesterone than estrogen down here, right? That's typical. Now, what happens is the more you become stressed, the more you start to decrease that ratio of progesterone. Now, even though estrogen is still below progesterone, here's estrogen, it's not above it, but the relative ratio of it is decreasing. And this is actually called estrogen dominance. And that can create a whole bunch of symptoms from excessive menstruation when you have your period. It can create mood issues, anxiety, depression. It can create breast tenderness. It can create back pain. It can create cramping. So when a female starts to have fatigue, you're going to start to see a spiral of other types of female hormone symptoms. Now, men's hormones aren't quite that intricate. They're kind of like a flat line throughout the month, where a woman kind of has this beautiful orchestra happening with FSH over here and estradiol here and LH and then progesterone, and then these hormones all fall together and create menstruation. Then it resets every month. So you have this beautiful kind of like orchestra, right? So if one instrument kind of gets out of tune, you know it. You can kind of really hear it. Where a male's hormones are going to kind of be flatline. They're going to be just like this straight foghorn, right? So it's kind of hard to mess that one up. Now, a lot of men, they can overdrive themselves with sleep and poor food and all that and throw it off, and also gut infections, which can create nutrient issues. So, of course, men aren't immune to this, but their hormones aren't quite as intricate. So when you just knock off one instrument in that orchestra for a female, they feel it and they know it. Now, the problem is this. If you're a female and you go to your conventional doctor, what are the options? Well, let's lay it out. They're going to typically recommend a birth control pill. Right? What does that do? The birth control pill basically takes and mugs the conductor and just creates a flat line typically throughout the month, kind of like the foghorn. You take your reminder pills, so to speak, and that allows you to menstruate, right? That's kind of how birth control pills work. Now, the problem with that is it's just controlling symptoms. It's giving you artificial high levels of estrogen or synthetic progesterone just to kind of flatline your cycle. And what it's doing is, because the hormones are so much higher, what it's actually doing is it's lowering your upstream hormones. FSH and LH, these are your upstream brain hormones. So the more you lower those brain hormones, then you don't quite have that good feedback loop. So then when you come off birth control pill years later, when you're ready to conceive, or you just are, you're in a relationship where it's not a big deal if you get pregnant, then you may have some symptoms. You may have issues where your cycle doesn't quite start back up because those brain hormones have kind of fallen asleep. You may start to have all the symptoms that you had before you went on the pill. They may come back with a vengeance ×2. And that could be all the mood stuff. That could be all skin issues. It could be migraine headaches. I mean, you name it, right? There's a lot of off-label uses for birth control pills outside of just preconception, right? So if you look at all those things, they're all going to come back. So we started with fatigue, if we go back over here, and then the fatigue then created other hormonal imbalances over here. And the reason why it did that is because your hormones are designed to deal with stress and inflammation in the moment. So we're hardwired that way, because if we didn't survive that stressor, guess what? We didn't make it to the next day. So reproduction and healing and recovery was all about tomorrow. It wasn't about today. Stress and inflammation right now was about today. Healing and recovery and sex hormones were about tomorrow. So the body didn't care, because survival was kind of hardwired. Well, now we're like, hey, we got these stressors under control, right? We live in houses. We have ways to defend ourselves. So those stressors that were there in the past are no longer there. But now we still have that same perpetual hormonal allocation that's still happening, allocating stress of today versus healing of tomorrow. So many people, they're like a sixth grade boy procrastinating on doing their homework. They're procrastinating on getting their hormones up to a good place where they can heal, because they're chronically sending off stress signals. So we have to work on getting the stress signals 100% dialed in. That's really important. So like I mentioned earlier, one of the first things you can do is get the blood sugar kind of dialed in. That'd be the first thing I'd say off the bat. The next is actually look and see how good or bad your hormones are. A lot of people will test their adrenals and we'll see a totally reverse cortisol pattern. So typically your cortisol should be higher in the morning and then lower throughout the day. So we have this gentle slope that happens throughout the day. And some people, it actually starts to get tilted in the opposite. And you know it because you start to feel maybe more fatigued in the morning. You start to get more wired or energized at night and have a hard time sleeping. That's one of the first patterns. And number two is your emotions start to feel more erratic throughout the day, because instead of your cortisol being at this place, now you're down here, or now you're up here. And the more your rhythm's out of balance, the more you feel out of balance. So we have the cortisol rhythm aspect. We also have thyroid hormones. I see a lot of patients that they have thyroid hormone imbalances too. And part of that's going to affect your resting energy metabolism. All hormones get metabolized and broken down into building blocks. And part of that breaking down process obviously happens in the gut with cholesterol, being able to digest cholesterol and protein and fats, which typically have cholesterol in it, right? Almost all your fats and proteins, especially if they're animal-based, will have cholesterol. Not all fats have cholesterol. Coconut oil does not have cholesterol, but it's a pure saturated fat. So typically animal-based products. That's going to be a building block for your sex hormones, and cholesterol is needed to kind of break that hormone down. That's why one of the big things that we see with low cholesterol, one of the big things we see with low thyroid levels is high cholesterol. And why is that? Because thyroid hormone is needed to break cholesterol down so it can be used for the hormonal substrate components. So kind of getting back to our thread, right? We have fatigue, we have adrenal issues. It could also be driven by thyroid hormone, because thyroid hormone is incredibly powerful and important at getting those hormonal substrates broken down so they can actually be used and thrown on the conveyor belt to make everything that we got going on here. So if we look at kind of like our triangle of fatigue, right? We have the adrenals up here, really important for regulating cortisol and inflammation. They also are a backup generator for our sex hormones, okay? We have thyroid down at the bottom left, which I just mentioned is important for breaking down those substrates, really important. And then the bottom right, okay, right here, is going to be our mitochondria. And our mitochondria is really important because that provides some of the nutrients for these pathways to run, whether it's the Krebs cycle and generating ATP and oxidizing agents such as NADH and FADH, really important. So actually they're reducing agents. That means they just take on electrons. And then basically those nutrients then funnel down into the electron transport chain and beta oxidation and create more ATP. So you kind of have like your Krebs cycle. You have glycolysis above, you have your Krebs cycle below, and then it goes right into the electron transport chain to the right there. So all of these funneling create about 36 units of ATP. And ATP is this currency for energy in the body as well. So if we look at adrenals, thyroid, and mitochondria are super, super important for getting everything dialed in. So again, if we kind of look at everything here, we have energy and we have hormones and we have fatigue and we have mood and we have focus that all can be affected by all of these different pathways going out of balance. So anyone have any questions, feel free and let me know. I'm going to start doing more of these YouTube lives so I can just get more interaction from people and be able to answer people's questions directly. Anyone has any questions, feel free and let me know in the group chat here as well. So I'm going to end today's call with just these aspects, looking at hormones, looking at energy, looking at blood sugar. Feel free on the notes of this video and on the comments of the video after it's posted, feel free and let me know more topics that you want to talk about. If not, we can just go riff on and do these Q&As and just get more people's feedback on how they can get their health improved. And I'll just give them, advice here just like this. So I'm excited to start using this medium. Again, make sure you subscribe so you get these updates. I'll let any friends and family know if they want to get their questions answered. This is going to be the new great medium to do it. All right. Thanks. This is Dr. J signing off. Any info will be below the video. Thanks. Bye now.